David Quinn, a retired military sniper, found solace in the quiet walks he took each morning with his loyal dog, Rocky. It was a simple routine, one that allowed him to connect with the calm of nature and escape the intensity of his past. The suburban park, with its children's laughter and the sound of birds singing, offered a sanctuary from the chaotic world. Here, the worries of the outside world seemed to vanish, replaced by the peaceful rhythm of each step he took alongside Rocky. Rocky, a sleek German shepherd, walked with grace and confidence, his keen senses always alert. Despite the calm exterior, there was an edge to the dog's movements. Rocky had been by David's side through countless moments, some of which David preferred to keep locked away in his mind. It was during these walks that the bond between the two of them strengthened, a silent understanding between the man and his dog. With every step, David felt a sense of peace he had struggled to find elsewhere. On this particular morning, the sun was shining through the trees, casting long, warm shadows on the winding path. Children played on the playground, their laughter rising into the air, while joggers passed by, their steady footfalls blending with the natural sounds of the park. It was a perfect morning, a rare moment of tranquility in a world that often felt overwhelming. But as they rounded a bend in the path, David's gaze caught sight of a group of men gathered beneath a large oak tree. The men were lounging in the shade, their harsh laughter echoing through the park. It wasn't the laughter that caught David's attention, but the way their eyes followed him as he walked. He could feel the weight of their stares, their murmurs growing louder, filled with mocking tones. At first, he ignored them, his steps steady and calm. But the discomfort was hard to shake off. The leader of the group, a burly man in a worn leather jacket, turned to his companions and whispered something that made them all laugh even louder. David's posture didn't change, but his instincts told him this wasn't just harmless teasing. He had seen enough hostility in his life to recognize the dangerous undercurrent behind their words. Rocky's ears twitched, his eyes sharp as he sensed the tension building in the air. The laughter grew, and the man in the leather jacket called out to David, "Hey, old man, I'm talking to you." His voice was loud, a deliberate challenge cutting through the otherwise peaceful morning. Rocky's growl was low but unmistakable. David placed a calming hand on his dog's neck, a silent command to hold steady. He didn't need to engage. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the best weapon. But the group wasn't ready to let him walk away. The man stepped into David's path, blocking him with a smirk on his face. "What, can't hear me?" the man taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. David stopped, his gaze meeting the man's with a calm, unwavering intensity. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation in his step. "I'm just out for a walk," David said, his voice steady, betraying no hint of unease. The man sneered, clearly not satisfied with the response. "This park belongs to people like us," he spat, his words dripping with venom. "People like you don't belong here." The words hung in the air, thick with a quiet threat that was impossible to ignore. David's muscles tensed slightly, but he remained composed. He had heard words like these before, had been in situations much worse than this. He knew that reacting to their provocation would only make things worse. Yet there was something about this moment, about the way the group moved in closer, their laughter now laced with menace, that made David's instincts kick into overdrive. Rocky shifted beside him, his body tense, ready to protect. David's grip on the leash tightened slightly, but he held back the command for Rocky to act. He needed to remain calm, to assess the situation. The leader, seeing the lack of fear in David's eyes, took a step closer, his voice now a low growl. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his tone threatening. "We don't want you here." It was then that David realized this wasn't just a random encounter. The group wasn't simply looking to intimidate him. They were looking for a fight. The man's hand moved slowly to his pocket, and David's sharp eyes caught the glint of something metallic. A chain, The tension in the air thickened, but David's focus remained razor-sharp. He knew how to handle himself in situations like this. He had learned to read the smallest of movements, to anticipate danger before it arrived. "Let's not make this worse than it needs to be," David said, his voice calm but firm. His eyes never left the leaders, his stance unyielding. The leader's grin widened, his hand now fully grasping the chain. "Too late for that," he sneered, swinging the chain in the air. The gang closed in, their movements subtle but intentional, tightening the circle around David. Rocky let out another low growl, his hackles rising as the group continued to advance. David's heart rate remained steady, his mind calculating each possible move. He wasn't just fighting for his own safety. He was protecting Rocky, and he wouldn't let this group of men take away the peace he had found in this park. As the leader swung the chain toward him, David sidestepped with the fluidity of someone who had been trained for moments just like this. With a quick motion, he grabbed the chain, twisted it from the leader's hands, and sent him stumbling backward. The gang's confidence wavered, their sneers faltering as David's calm resolve stood against their aggression. For a brief moment, the park seemed to hold its breath. The sound of children laughing, the chirping of birds, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind all faded into the background. The only thing that mattered now was the confrontation unfolding before them. David's stance remained steady, his gaze never wavering. He wasn't afraid of these men. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and they were about to find out. As the leader of the group stumbled back from David's quick move, his eyes narrowed in anger. The sneer on his face deepened, his confidence shattered for a moment, but it quickly returned with a renewed sense of purpose. He wiped his hand across his face, smirking as he stepped forward again. "You're tough for an old man," he spat, the words heavy with disdain. "But you're out of your league here." David stood unwavering, the weight of his training pressing down on his every movement. The peaceful morning he had hoped for had now turned into something far darker. He had dealt with far worse before, but there was something about the palpable sense of fear and hate radiating from these men that unsettled him. This wasn't a typical altercation. It was a deliberate attempt to break him, to force him into a corner. Rocky, sensing his owner's growing tension, moved closer, his body coiled and ready. The quiet, barely audible growls coming from the dog reverberated in the air, a clear warning to anyone who dared come too close. The gang's jeers and taunts grew louder, almost as if trying to break David's calm resolve. David's eyes flickered briefly to the sky above, the serene blue sky now seeming like a cruel contrast to the storm brewing on the ground. But despite the tension, he kept his expression neutral, his eyes locked firmly on the leaders. "I don't want any trouble," David said, his voice even, though the words carried the weight of something more. "I'm just here for a walk." "Well, too bad," the leader retorted, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "Looks like you've walked into the wrong place." The group shifted, their postures growing more aggressive as they encircled David. The leader stepped closer, his hand now pulling something from his jacket, a heavy metal chain. "You're about to learn that this isn't just any park," he sneered, flicking the chain through the air. David's body tensed, but his calm demeanor never wavered. He could sense the shift in the group's energy. The atmosphere was thick with hostility, but he had learned long ago to keep his emotions in check, to let his instincts take over. These men were trying to provoke him, to push him into a fight. They believed their numbers would overpower him, but they were wrong. As the leader swung the chain toward him, David stepped aside effortlessly, his military training coming to the forefront. With precision, he grabbed the chain mid-swing, twisting it in his hands and using the leader's own momentum to pull him off balance. The leader stumbled back, falling to the ground with an unceremonious thud. The moment was brief, but it was enough to shift the balance of power. The gang's laughter faltered, and for the first time, doubt flickered in their eyes. They had underestimated David. What they thought was just a lonely, harmless man walking his dog was, in fact, a trained warrior with a companion that could take down any threat. "Get up!" One of the other men barked at the leader, his voice filled with frustration. The others hesitated, unsure of how to proceed now that the situation had taken an unexpected turn. David, however, wasn't about to give them a chance to regroup. With a swift movement, he picked up the discarded chain, twirling it in his hands as if testing its weight. His eyes swept over the group, each man now realizing that they were facing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The leader, now on his feet and furious, growled under his breath, "You think you're some kind of hero?" He spat, wiping dirt from his jacket. His eyes burned with hatred, but there was a flicker of doubt now. He had expected an easy target, someone who would cower under pressure. Instead, he found himself facing an opponent who wasn't afraid to stand his ground. David didn't respond to the taunt. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words. As the group closed in, he tightened his grip on the chain, preparing for whatever came next. Rocky, ever vigilant, stayed by his side, his eyes darting between the men, sensing every subtle movement. One of the gang members, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his neck, took a step forward, his hands twitching nervously. "You don't belong here," he muttered, his voice edged with unease. "People like you are what's ruining this place." David's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "People like me," he repeated, his tone calm but sharp. "You're going to have to explain that to me." The wiry man shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to continue. The others watched, their aggressive postures faltering for just a moment. It was a small victory, but it was enough. The balance of power was tipping, and David knew that now was the time to strike. Before the gang could regroup, Rocky let out a deep, menacing growl. The dog's posture had changed completely, his body low to the ground, his eyes locked on the group. The message was clear. This wasn't just David's fight. This was theirs. David's eyes flicked briefly to his dog. Rocky was ready to protect, to defend. They were a team, and in this moment, they were one. David's calm demeanor never wavered, but inside, a fire was burning. This wasn't just about standing his ground. This was about protecting the peace he had fought so hard to find. The leader took a step back, his eyes darting nervously between David and Rocky. He knew, deep down, that they had made a mistake. They had underestimated not only David, but also the fierce loyalty of his dog. And now, it was too late to back down. David didn't wait for them to make the next move. With one swift motion, he spun around, the chain flying through the air as he brought it down on the leader's arm, disarming him in one smooth strike. The group's confidence shattered completely. They weren't in control anymore. The gang's attempts to intimidate David had failed. The power had shifted, and now they were the ones on the defensive. David stepped forward, his eyes locking with the leader's, his voice cold and unyielding. "You made a mistake today," he said, his tone final. "And now you're going to pay for it." The leader, now shaking with a mixture of rage and fear, attempted to stand taller. But there was no strength behind his words anymore. The fight was over before it had truly begun. David and Rocky had won. The gang began to retreat, slowly at first, then more quickly as the weight of their defeat sank in. One by one, they disappeared into the park, leaving David and Rocky standing in the quiet aftermath. The sounds of the park had returned, but the air was heavier now, thick with the understanding that this fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The gang had retreated for now, but the battle had only just begun. As David stood in the park, his heart still racing from the confrontation, he could feel the adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a deep, unsettling awareness that this wasn't over. The park, once a place of peace, now felt like a battlefield, the air thick with tension. David's eyes scanned the surroundings, assessing the situation, knowing that this wasn't just about defending himself anymore. His fingers tightened around the leash, and he glanced down at Rocky, who stood at attention. His fur slightly bristled. The dog, a silent companion, had been with David through thick and thin. They had shared countless moments of quiet camaraderie. But now, Rocky's eyes gleamed with a predatory sharpness, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. The gang may have backed off for now, but David knew they weren't the kind to back down for long. The sound of footsteps crunching through the dry leaves broke the silence. David's eyes snapped to the source of the noise. His instincts flared, and within seconds, he spotted them. 4 men emerging from the shadows at the far end of the park. They were moving stealthily, their eyes scanning the area, clearly searching for a way to take David by surprise. David's hand moved instinctively to his waist, where he always carried his military-grade knife. He didn't intend to use it unless absolutely necessary, but he was prepared for whatever came next. He had learned to trust his instincts in moments like these. His training had taught him how to navigate danger without hesitation. Rocky's ears perked, and David could see the dog's body tense. Without a word, David gave a slight nod, signaling Rocky to stay close. The two of them moved silently, their movements practiced and fluid. They knew how to blend into their surroundings, how to remain unseen until the moment was right. The gang members, unaware of David's watchful eyes, began to move closer, their steps slow and deliberate. David's breath slowed, his mind calculating each potential outcome. He couldn't allow them to surround him. If they did, the fight would be over before it had even started. He needed to act first. Without warning, David darted to his left, disappearing behind a thick tree. His heart beat steadily in his chest, his body alert, every muscle prepared for the upcoming confrontation. Rocky followed closely behind, his steps nearly silent. The dog was perfectly trained to stay in sync with David, to act as his protector and partner in any situation. They were a team, and that was what made them so dangerous. The first of the gang members walked past the tree where David was hiding, his back turned, unaware of the danger just a few feet away. David took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and sprang into action. In one smooth, practiced motion, he emerged from behind the tree, grabbing the man by the shoulder and spinning him around. The man barely had time to react before David slammed a fist into his face, knocking him to the ground. The man's body crumpled, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Before the others could react, Rocky pounced, his powerful jaws sinking into the leg of the second man, sending him stumbling to the ground with a startled scream. The dog held him down, his teeth locked onto the man's calf, preventing him from moving. Rocky growled low, a sound so menacing that it sent a chill through the remaining gang members. David quickly moved to the next man, who had already drawn a knife from his jacket. The blade flashed in the dim light, but David was faster. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it sharply, forcing the knife to drop from his hand. In one fluid motion, David kicked the man's legs out from under him, sending him sprawling onto the ground. The gang member let out a grunt of pain, but David didn't give him the chance to recover. He slammed his knee into the man's chest, pinning him down as he delivered a quick, efficient blow to his temple, knocking him unconscious. The last of the gang members was still standing, his face twisted with rage. He raised his fists, ready to fight. David's expression remained calm. He had dealt with worse odds before, and this time would be no different. The man charged at David, fists swinging wildly. But David was too quick. With one swift motion, he sidestepped the attack, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The gang member yelped in pain as David applied pressure, forcing him to his knees. "Enough," David said, his voice low and controlled. "This is your last warning. Walk away, and you live to see another day." The man gritted his teeth, clearly unwilling to admit defeat. But David's grip tightened, his unspoken promise clear. The next move would be the man's last. With a final, defeated grunt, the man slumped, his body giving up the fight. David released his hold, stepping back as the man fell to the ground, defeated. The others were already incapacitated, sprawled on the ground, their movements slow and pained. David's gaze swept over them one last time, ensuring they weren't going to get up anytime soon. His heart still raced, but his breath had steadied. The immediate danger had passed. Rocky, his body still tense, approached David and stood by his side, watching the gang members warily. Despite the fight being over, Rocky's instincts were still on high alert, his body coiled and ready for any further threat. David rested a hand on his dog's head, offering a quiet moment of reassurance. "We're not done yet, are we?" David muttered, more to himself than to Rocky. His eyes scanned the park, the peaceful surroundings now shattered by the violence that had just unfolded. This was far from over. The gang might have been taken down for now, but David knew they wouldn't stay down for long. And there was still the matter of what they had left behind. The bag, the phone, the messages. There was a larger network to uncover, one that David hadn't fully understood until now. The fight wasn't just about surviving this moment. It was about dismantling the whole system that allowed men like these to operate with impunity. The stakes had been raised, and David was now fully aware of the challenge ahead. As he stood, his gaze hardening, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this go. Whatever it took, he would see this through. And with Rocky by his side, he was ready for whatever came next. David turned and began walking, his steps purposeful. He didn't know exactly what he was up against, but he had the tools, the training, and the dog to take it on. As they left the park, the peaceful morning seemed a distant memory. The park no longer held the same serenity. The peaceful world David had longed for was slipping away. But with every step, he grew more determined. Whatever forces were lurking in the shadows, he would bring them to light. And nothing, not the men he had just taken down, nor the ones who might still be out there, was going to stop him. The sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the park as David walked, his mind racing with the weight of what had just happened. The confrontation had been fierce, but it wasn't over yet. The men he had just fought weren't alone. They were part of something much bigger. The fight had been physical, but now, David realized, it was also about exposing the network they were part of, the fear they were trying to spread. The park, a once peaceful place, now felt like a battleground, and David knew it would never be the same again. As he moved through the now silent streets, Rocky at his side, David thought about the bag he had found earlier. The burner phone. The map with its circled addresses. His mind kept going back to those notes, addresses of families who had just moved in, families that had no idea they were being targeted. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't just about him or the people who would try to attack him today. This was about the lives of innocent people, people who had nowhere to turn. But David had an advantage, the strength of his training, the loyalty of his dog, and the knowledge that he couldn't let this go. The more he thought about it, the clearer the path became. The gang members had been nothing more than pawns, and the real power lay with the ones who orchestrated everything from the shadows. Daryl Kane. The name kept echoing in David's mind, a constant reminder of the man at the heart of it all. David knew that if he wanted to put an end to this, he needed to go after Kane. But it wasn't just a matter of taking down one man. It was about dismantling everything. The system that had allowed men like Kane to rise to power, the network that supported him, the fear that they spread to keep people silent. As David and Rocky approached the outskirts of town, his thoughts turned to the people he had left behind. The families who had been pushed out of their homes, the ones who had been made to feel unwelcome. They deserved a chance at peace, at safety. But that peace had been shattered by a group of men who believed they could bully and intimidate anyone who crossed their path. David had seen enough. He wasn't going to let them continue to hurt people, not if he could stop it. He pulled his truck to a stop near an old warehouse on the edge of town, a place he had spotted during his earlier reconnaissance. The building loomed in front of him, a dark silhouette against the evening sky. It wasn't just a warehouse. It was the heart of the operation. The air around the building was thick with the stench of oil and metal, and the low hum of machinery filled the air. This was it, the place where everything had been coordinated, where the shipments of drugs, guns, and money were moved under the cover of night. David knew that infiltrating this place wouldn't be easy. There were guards, weapons, and all the security measures in place to protect Cain and his operation. But David had been trained to face challenges like this. He had spent years honing his skills in the military, learning how to move silently, how to observe without being seen. He wasn't going to rush in blindly. He had a plan, a strategy. As he slid out of the truck, he took a moment to check his gear. His rifle was secured in the back seat, and his sidearm was holstered at his side. He reached for the rifle, feeling its weight in his hands. He had spent countless hours training with this weapon, learning its balance, its power. It wasn't just about shooting. It was about control, precision, and patience. Rocky hopped out of the truck, his tail wagging as he moved to David's side. The dog knew what was coming. He could sense the tension in the air, the sense of danger that seemed to pulse through the ground. David gave him a quick nod. "Stay close," he murmured, knowing that the dog would be ready to protect him if needed. The night was still, the only sounds the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of the city. David moved carefully, his footsteps barely making a sound on the gravel. He was like a shadow, blending into the darkness as he made his way toward the warehouse. Rocky followed without a sound, his body low to the ground, his senses on high alert. As they neared the warehouse, David's heart rate quickened, but he kept his breathing steady. His eyes scanned the area, looking for any signs of movement, any guard who might be watching. He knew that this was the moment. Everything he had done up until now had led him here, to this very spot. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. He crouched behind a stack of crates, peering through the gaps to observe the guards standing at the entrance. They were talking, not paying much attention to their surroundings. David smiled faintly. He had been in situations like this before. It wasn't just about overpowering them. It was about being smarter, more efficient. Rocky remained still, his eyes fixed on the guards as he waited for the signal. David reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small signal jammer. With a quick flick of his wrist, he activated it, sending a wave of static through the air. The guards' radios crackled and went silent. They turned, confused, looking around for the source of the interference. It was the perfect distraction. In one fluid motion, David sprang from his hiding place, moving like a blur as he crossed the distance between him and the guards. He knocked the first guard to the ground with a well-placed strike, rendering him unconscious before the second guard could even react. Rocky was right behind him, tackling the second man to the ground with a snarl. The guard tried to fight back, but Rocky's grip was unyielding, and within moments, he was incapacitated. David and Rocky worked together seamlessly, neutralizing the remaining guards one by one. As they moved through the warehouse, clearing the area, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He had to find Cain. He had to put an end to this. At the center of the warehouse, he found what he was looking for: an office, the heart of the operation. Inside, the dim light of a computer screen flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Papers were scattered across the desk: financial records, shipment schedules, and lists of names. It was all there, the evidence he needed to bring down the entire network. David didn't waste any time. He grabbed the papers, taking photos with his phone, knowing that this evidence would be critical in dismantling Cain's operation. But just as he turned to leave, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Cain. David's grip tightened on his rifle as he prepared for the final confrontation. This wasn't just about stopping the gang. It was about taking down the man who had caused so much pain, who had torn families apart for his own gain. Cain had underestimated David, and now he would pay the price. David moved toward the door, his heart steady, his mind focused. This was it, the final stand, the end of the road. The fight for survival was far from over, but David knew that with Rocky by his side, he could take on whatever came next. And with one last look at the warehouse, he made his way toward Cain, knowing that this time there would be no turning back.